The Darkangel by Meredith Ann Pierce, Chapter 4, A Spindle of Fallow Gold. Learning to use the spindle proved long and difficult. Ariel spent hours in her chamber. She had found a small bare room in the servants' quarters to serve as hers. Sitting with the spindle, going through the motions of back-spinning a few threads of non-existent fiber, securing them with a half-hitch, then giving the spindle a twist to set it spinning and letting it drop, just as she had done with her spindle of ram's horn at home. Nothing availed. Instead of producing a thread on which to hang and twist, the golden spindle inevitably dropped to the floor with a clear, heavy clink, and sat there, turning like a top until it fell over. Try as she might, Ariel could not master its mechanism. The months passed. The wraiths, of course, were no help. She went to visit them often as promised, but they were so horribly thin and dreary, and complained so bitterly at the weight of their coarse drab garments, that she could bear them for not longer than an hour at a time. The gargoyles, too, she took to visiting, though she was careful never to approach close enough to be scratched or bitten. She brought them fish and mushrooms that she had gathered in the caves. They looked so starved, and their eyes were filled with such pain that she could scarcely help but feel pity for them. After she had come to them several times, they began to look for her, to yap and yelp the moment they heard her step on the tower stairs. Gradually, as the months passed, they grew less bony, even sleek. Their eyes lost their wild glaze, and they ceased to howl and shriek so terribly on the long fortnights. And then, suddenly, Ariel discovered the working of the spindle. She had been practicing, striving with it, trying for hours to cajole it into producing a thread. This it had stubbornly refused to do, and slowly, as she went through the motions of spinning without thread, she fell into a kind of daydream, remembering her first spinning lesson at the age of 4 in the spinning room, among the other women spinning their white wool with absent-minded ease. Bomba had put the ram's horn spindle into her hands, shown her how to draw and twist back the wether's wool into the beginnings of a thread, how to wrap it around the base and secure it at the top notch in the shaft, then let the spindle fall and turn while she drew the wool in thin tufts through her fingers, and let them twist away as the spool of ram's horn dropped down slowly, down, it seemed, an eternity, until it touched the ground with a click and fell over. But the sound Ariel heard now, as she stood in her room in the vampire's castle, was not the soft click of old bone on hard-packed earth, but the bright clink of gold on stone. She looked down, and there at her feet lay the spindle, still turning idly, with a coarse white thread twisting up from the shaft. Quickly, before she could lose the knack, Ariel snatched up the spindle, wound the thread, and let the golden spool drop. The thread did not break, continued to form, though it was thick and ragged as a gasp. "It must be amazement," thought Ariel, "that I am spinning, for I am amazed to be spinning at all." After that, she took the spindle with her when she visited the wraiths and spun there. At first she could find only pity to spin for them, a coarse, dull thread, like the garments they wore. And when, after a few hours, in the wraith's company, she could stand them no more, sometimes the thread turned to woolly loathing, sticky and stinging as a bruised nettle stem. Then she would leave them and go down to the caves to bathe in the warm river or talk to the Darrow. And after a while she would go back to the wraiths and take up the spindle again, twisting a thick thread of coarse, dull pity out of the air. The months passed, and then one day it all changed. The wraiths had become familiar to her now, though their bodies were even thinner than when she first had seen them. Their pitifully dull wits actually seemed to have improved slightly as she spent time with them, talked to them. Glimmerings of memory came to them now, though when Ariel pressed them, none of them were often able to distinguish between glimpses of their own past lives and snatches recounted by a sister wraith. Ariel still could not determine which of them was Eowyn. Indeed, was not entirely sure she could have borne the knowing. Gradually, though, she was coming to tolerate, then even take with good humor, the whining whispers of her charges. Despite the vampire's words, they were not really mistresses. Their nagging insistence that the thread she was spinning was too heavy and coarse. She had run out of loathing, and though they were painfully eager for attention, she tried not to pity them. And one day, while she sat spinning, she found the thread passing through her fingers was growing thinner and finer than the coarse Then the coarseness went out of it completely, of a sudden, and she realized she was spinning patience now, and love followed fast behind. Whereas an ounce of pity had spun only a skein of thread, and loathing even less, a drop of charity made a thread so fine and long that she had not yet reached the end of it, and whereas the spinning of pity and loathing exhausted her after only a few hours' work, charity and patience were the easiest spinning she had ever done. Soon she was weaving kirtles for the wraiths of an old handloom, on an old handloom she had found abandoned in one corner of the cellar. The work was light and taxed her not at all. Once, after several day-months had passed, 3 or 4, she did not count them, she saw through a window the Darkangel standing on the ramparts of a balcony that jutted from the castle overlooking the garden. She stopped to look at him. It was the first time she had seen him in a long turn of stars, perhaps even since the last day-month. The Icarus stood, gazing out over the plain. His wings sloped down from his shoulders like a thick cape of black velvet that swallowed the light of Sol Star and gave none of it back in a sheen. His face was fair and as limestone, perfectly immobile, as though chiseled of stone, but his colorless eyes roved aimlessly over the barren landscape. He turned suddenly and saw her. Startled, Ariel drew back from the window, but he called to her, not by name. She did not think she had ever told it to him. "You, girl!" And she went out to him. For when he looked at her straight on, his clear eyes meeting hers, her strength failed her. She could do no other than to obey him. He turned away from her and gazed again over the plain. "Someone has been feeding my gargoyles," he said. "Was it you?" "Yes, my lord," she answered softly. "I did not give you permission," he said shortly, still looking out over the land. "No, my lord," she said. "Why?" demanded the vampire, still not looking at her. "Why did you do it?" "They were so hungry, my lord," said Ariel. He looked at her now, and seeing again the cold beauty of his face, Ariel felt weak. "I like them kept lean," he said. "They make better watchdogs then." It was not until he looked away that Ariel found her tongue. "Their eyes will be sharper and their ears the keener if they are not distracted by hunger," she began. "Do you propose to argue with me?" snapped the Icarus. "No, my lord," said Ariel softly. The vampire drummed the fingers of one perfect white hand on the battlements. They gleamed slightly, like lambent Avaric, against the dull dark stone. "Tell me, how did you manage not to be killed by them?" "Their chains are not long enough to let them come near me if I stand against the stair." The Darkangel nodded, then turned to glance at her over one Nightwing's shoulder. "You knew this before you went up?" She shook her head, for she could not speak while he watched her. "Then why did you go up?" he asked her. "They needed someone to feed them," she stammered as his eyes wandered. "They would have killed you if they could," said the vampire. She answered, "Yes." "Then why?" he said with real curiosity now. "Why did you go up?" Said Ariel, "They needed me." The Darkangel shook his head and then laughed. "Ha ha ha! I suppose I should kill you," he said idly at last. "I did forbid you to go up on the tower, but I shall not. You are interesting. Not one of my servants was ever brave enough to go up amongst the gargoyles before, much less disobey me." He shook his head, frowned very slightly. "Strange, you do not look brave." He eyed her then as though he expected some answer. She looked away. "I am not brave, my lord." He laughed again. "Perhaps not. Perhaps you are only stupid. No matter. Henceforth you shall feed my gargoyles as well as attend my wives." He paused, then expecting another reply, and Ariel murmured, "You honor me, my lord." "But keep them lean," he said, with a sudden severity. "If ever I discover them growing fat and sleepy, you shall be their last meal for a long 12-month. And with that, he strode away from her and disappeared into the castle. Ariel leaned against the terrace wall for many moments after, waiting for her heart to steady and her strength to return. And we'll pause there.